Royal food tasters have been tasting the food of the rich and powerful, testing them for poison for thousands of years. Though the practice isn't foolproof, because if the person adding the poison is the food taster themselves, well, the whole system kind of breaks down. And that is exactly what happened with Claudius, the Roman emperor, who died after dining on his favorite dish of mushrooms. So thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring this video as I try not to poison myself on these ancient Roman honey-glazed mushrooms. This time on Tasting History. Being a royal food taster has to be one of the least desirable jobs in history. Yes, you do get to eat some of the best food that there is, but there is a possibility that you might die doing it. So it's no wonder that once in a while, the food tasters went rogue. And that seems to be what happened in 54 AD when Halotus, who is the first named food taster that I could find, probably poisoned his boss. So the Emperor Claudius had been ruling the Roman Empire for over 13 years. It had been a time of prosperity and expansion for the empire, but a time of continuous strife in Claudius's personal life, much of which had to do with Claudius's fourth wife, Agrippina the Younger. See, they both entered into the marriage already having children, and among others, Claudius had a son, Britannicus, and Agrippina had a son, Nero. You might have heard of him. Well, Claudius adopts Nero and takes him on as his own son and decides that after he dies, the two boys will rule the Roman Empire together, because that's going to work out. Well, for a while, things are going hunky-dory, but eventually the marriage between Claudius and Agrippina starts to kind of go on the skids, and Claudius is overheard complaining that he has really bad taste in wives. This is his fourth wife, and that maybe he regrets adopting Nero and that Britannicus should be the sole heir to the Roman Empire, so that the Roman people may at last have a genuine Caesar. Ouch. Well, Agrippina is not the kind of person to let her son be passed over, so she allegedly, and this is all alleged, she allegedly goes to a well-known poison maker named Locusta, and she gets this poison. And this is where the food taster Halotus comes into the story, because he is the one who supposedly does the deed. According to Tacitus, the poison was administered by the eunuch Halotus, whose regular duty was to bring in and taste the dishes. So notorious later were the whole proceedings that authors of the period have recorded that the poison was sprinkled on an exceptionally fine mushroom. But it seems that the poison didn't do what it was supposed to do, because Claudius got sick and threw up the poison. So Agrippina fell back on the complicity of the doctor Xenophon. He, it is believed, under cover of assisting the emperor's struggles to vomit, plunged a feather dipped in a quick poison down his throat. It's like in The Emperor's New Groove, where the poison to kill Cusco doesn't work, and so they have to hit him on the head. Now, the ancient authors kind of disagree on some of the details of the story. Some say that Halotus wasn't actually the one to administer the poison, but clearly he didn't do his job very well regardless. And did he get fired? No, he did not, because Nero, who then became emperor after they also poisoned Britannicus, a little pattern, he hired Halotus to be his royal food taster. So kind of makes me think maybe he was in on it. And even later, under Galba, who was the next emperor, Halotus gets a big old promotion to procurator. Talk about failing upwards. But the moral of the story is, if you fear that you're going to be poisoned, you better make sure that you really trust your royal food taster. Or you can do as I'm going to do and just make the food yourself. Now, since Claudius died eating mushrooms, I have decided to look through the ancient Roman text Apicius and find a recipe for another method for mushrooms. Place the chopped stalks in a clean pan, adding pepper, lovage, and a little honey. Mix with garum, add a little oil. Super simple and rather different than I feel mushrooms are typically prepared today. Now, most of these ancient Roman recipes call for the mushroom cap and stem to be served differently. They're prepared kind of differently. And if you want to just use the stems, that's fine, but I'm not going to be making another dish, so I would just throw away a bunch of mushroom caps, which seems wasteful. So I am going to use both. So for this recipe, what you'll need is 1/2 pound or 225 grams of small mushrooms. I am separating the stems and cutting the heads in half just so they cook evenly. 2 tablespoons of olive oil, 1 teaspoon of pepper. I'm using long pepper, which was beloved by the ancient Romans, and frankly, I think it's a little bit better than regular black pepper, so I'll put a link in the description to where you can get some of that, but you can use either one. 2 to 3 tablespoons of fresh lovage or celery leaves, chopped fine, 1 tablespoon of honey, and 1 tablespoon of garum. This is the ancient Roman fish sauce that I have actually made here on the channel before, and if you don't want to make it, and you probably shouldn't, I will put a link to where you can get some that is excellent in the description, but if you just want to use a fish sauce of any kind, that works. So first, whisk the honey and garum together in a small bowl, then whisk in the ground pepper. Then heat the oil in a heavy pan large enough that the mushrooms, when added, can sit in the pan in a single layer, and then saute the mushrooms over medium-high heat, coating them in the oil for 2 to 3 minutes, and then pour in the honey and garum mixture and coat the mushrooms in that. Sprinkle in the lovage leaves and reduce the heat to medium-low and let the mushrooms simmer until most of the liquid has evaporated and you're left with a lovely glaze. This should take 3 to 5 minutes. And while the liquid reduces, I wanted to mention that I'm going to start putting out a newsletter every week or so with some of the history and stuff that I don't get to actually talk about here in the videos that just didn't kind of make it in, and some of the books and articles that I use for research and other cool little history things that I just think are interesting. So if you want to sign up for that, I'm going to put a link in the description to the website, tastinghistory.com, and just go to the bottom and you can sign up for that. But before you do that, let me tell you a little bit more about the history of one of the worst jobs, royal food taster. Food tasters have been around since time immemorial because there seems to be something about being rich and powerful that makes you paranoid that people are trying to poison your food. And that paranoia actually might be rather well-founded, especially if you're kind of a jerk. Now, one of history's most famous paranoiacs was Mark Antony, the lover of Cleopatra. Now, often when we think of Antony and Cleopatra, we think of this wonderful love affair, but really, they did not have a healthy relationship at all. Neither of them trusted each other all that much, and Pliny the Elder wrote that Antonius held the queen in such extreme distrust as to be in dread of her very attentions even, and would not so much as touch his food unless another person had tasted it first. Well, for some reason, Cleopatra thought this was funny and decided to play a little practical joke on Antony by circumventing the food taster. So before this big banquet that they were going to have, she had a circlet of flowers made for her head, but she dipped each flower in poison. Well, the banquet begins and the food taster tests all of Mark Antony's food and his wine, and everything seems to be good, doesn't die. So things are going along, and partway through the banquet, everybody's a little tipsy, and Cleopatra says, "Hey, Mark Antony, I triple dog dare you to take one of my flowers and drink it in your wine." And if A Christmas Story has taught us anything, it is that you can't really turn down a triple dog dare. See, he'd been wary of the wine being poisoned, but it wasn't. And he didn't think that she would be crazy enough to wear poisoned flowers in her hair. But she was. And so she took one of these poisoned flowers and popped it in his wine. Then, just as Antonius was on the very point of drinking, she arrested his arm with her hand. "Behold, Marcus Antonius," she said, "the woman against whom you are so careful to take these new precautions of yours in employing your tasters." Saying this, she ordered a man to be brought from prison and made him drink off the potion. He did so, and fell dead upon the spot. In some versions of the story, it's actually the food taster who has to end up trying it, and he's the one that died. But regardless, very toxic relationship between these two. And I feel like the lesson to be learned here is if you're going to use a food taster, you gotta use them all the time. Maimonides, the 12th century physician for Saladin, wrote a treatise all about poisons and how to protect oneself, and he talks about how you're supposed to have someone taste the food that you think is poisoned. He actually says the person tasting it should be the person who has offered it to you. And he should not be satisfied with eating only a mouthful, as I have seen done by the cooks of kings in their presence. He also says you should take some personal responsibility and learn to identify foods that have been poisoned, or at least foods that you suspect of being poisoned. Basically, any foods that are sour, pungent, or highly flavored. Also, ill-smelling dishes, or those prepared with onion or garlic. All these foods are best taken from a reliable person, above all suspicion, because the way to harm by poison is only to those foods which assimilate the poisonous taste and smell, as well as the poison's appearance and consistency. But even with these precautions, sometimes, on occasion, you might accidentally ingest some poison, at which point you need to do like Claudius did and try to throw it up. Maimonides says that the best thing to do is to induce vomiting and then have some milk or butter. Or, best case scenario, you have a rooster around, because it is said that the excrements of roosters have a specific property to eliminate every poison by vomiting. Though I feel like that's just kind of swapping one poison with another, but what do I know? Now, poisoning has always been a popular way of getting rid of a rascally noble here and there, but by the late Middle Ages and the Renaissance, poisoning had become really in fashion. By the 15th century, anyone who was anyone had food tasters because, especially in places like Italy and the Papal States, poisoning had become quite common, or at least people thought that it had become common. Families like the Medici were famous for taking out their rivals with poison, a reputation which is probably not as real as people thought that it was. But the fact that people thought that they were poisoning everyone put everyone on edge. In the late 16th century, Gaspar de Guzman, the powerful Duke of Olivares, freaked out at a dinner in Valencia. When, having taken his first drink and tasting a very unnatural flavor in his wine, he feared poisoning and jumped away from the table in a great fury, asking for remedies. Meanwhile, the wine steward, having heard what was going on, reassured His Excellency that the bad taste resulted from his not having rinsed the wine flask well after washing it with vinegar and salt. When the steward then proceeded to drink the same wine, Olivares finally calmed down. So it wasn't poisoned, you just gave me a dirty cup to drink out of. You're still fired. Now, further north, in England, the clergy as well as the nobility were so paranoid of being poisoned that not only did they have their taste testers try their food and drink, but they had them kiss anything that might come in contact with their mouth while eating. In 1465, at a feast for an archbishop, it was written that then the carver taketh the napkin from his shoulder, and kisseth it for his assay, and delivereth to the Lord. Then take he the spoon, drieth it, and kisseth it for his assay. In the meantime the sewer goeth to the dresser, and there taketh assay of every dish, and doth give it to the steward and the cook to eat of all porridges, mustard, and other sauces. King Henry VIII took it a step further and had his servants kiss his sheets every night before he went to bed. And his daughter, Queen Elizabeth I, was also paranoid of being poisoned, and maybe for good reason, because it was suspected that the King of Spain was actually trying to hatch a plot to poison her. Supposedly, it was going to be done via her 70-year-old physician, Rodrigo Lopez, who had fled Spain from the Spanish Inquisition. There was really no evidence against him, and he had no reason to hurt the Queen, but there was a lot of hatred against him, partly because he was Jewish, and so he ended up being executed, even though everyone kind of knew that he wasn't guilty. And it was around this same time that a German traveler, Paul Hentzner, visited the court of Queen Elizabeth and later wrote down what he was seeing in regards to the royal food tasters. At length came a certain unmarried countess, accompanied by a noble matron bearing the food taster's knife, and when she had curtsied 3 times with the greatest of decorum, she then approached the table and wiped the plates with salt and bread. After she had remained for a while by the table, the royal bodyguards arrived, bringing in 24 courses in turn, on silver plates for the most part trimmed with gold. A certain nobleman received each course from them one at a time and placed them on the table. A lady food taster gave each bodyguard a mouthful to eat from the plate he bore, lest there be any suspicion of poison. Now you gotta realize that at this time, pretty much all of the poisons available took at least an hour to kick in, so they would often taste the food, then wait an hour before giving it to the queen, so everything was gonna get served cold. Now the idea of royal food taster, or food taster in general, does seem rather antiquated, but it's not gone. Rather recently, there have been food tasters employed, especially by maniacal, evil leaders who are in fear of being poisoned. Adolf Hitler, for example. He had a team of food tasters, and Margot Volk, who was one of them, came out to tell her story. See, she and her family were not in good graces with the Nazi Party. Her father was actually taken away because he wouldn't join, and she refused to participate in the League of German Girls. Well, following some bombings in Berlin, she fled the city and ended up in a small town in Poland. And it happened to be that this small town was right near the Wolf's Lair, where Hitler set up his Eastern Front headquarters. I'd hardly arrived when the SS showed up at the door and demanded, "Come with us." At that point, she became one of 15 girls at the Wolf's Lair who tested Hitler's food for poison. The food was delicious, only the best vegetables, asparagus, bell peppers, everything you can imagine, and always with a side of rice or pasta. But this constant fear. We knew of all these poisoning rumors and could never enjoy the food. Every day we feared it was going to be our last meal. We cried a lot and hugged each other. We asked each other, will we still be alive tomorrow or not? The girls would eat the food and then wait an hour, and then if they hadn't died, the food would be taken to Hitler. Following a failed attempt on his life in 1944, not by poisoning, but by a suitcase bomb, the girls were rounded up, and rather than getting to live at home, they were basically put in captivity at the Wolf's Lair and kept under constant guard. And only when the Soviet army came through did Margot escape, but she was the only one to escape. All of the other food tasters died. Now that Soviet army, of course, was under the control of Joseph Stalin, who also employed a food taster. Though instead of using someone he thought was expendable, he would only use someone who he absolutely trusted. Sasha Ignatashvili. Now, Sasha was friends with Stalin when they were boys, and many have actually claimed that they were even half-brothers. Though Stalin's true paternity is unknown, so it's impossible to know if they actually were. But regardless, they were very good friends, and he trusted Sasha, and so he put Sasha in charge of all of his big banquets and state dinners, and basically any time that he was eating. And eventually, he even became his food taster, earning him the nickname the Rabbit. What I found fascinating is that since Sasha was in charge of these big banquets, he employed a number of cooks. And one of those cooks had cooked for a lot of famous Russians, not only Stalin, but also Vladimir Lenin and Grigory Rasputin. And that chef has a famous grandson. His grandson is Vladimir Putin, who also uses taste testers because he's paranoid of being poisoned. Now, I personally am not paranoid of being poisoned, so I don't need a food tester to taste these ancient Roman mushrooms. And here we are, honeyed mushrooms from ancient Rome. Now I say I don't need a food taster, but I actually wouldn't turn one down because, spoiler alert, I don't actually care for mushrooms. It's not their flavor, it's a texture thing, like squeak when I bite into them. But we'll see how I like them today. Here we go. The flavor's really good. You know what this reminds me of? Honey glazed cashews or something like that, but then you get that earthiness of the mushroom. It's actually a really nice combination. And then a little spice from the pepper. That's a complicated dish. I actually like that. If I like mushrooms, I would love that on maybe a different vegetable or something like that. But if you like mushrooms, I bet you'd really, really like this. Especially because I feel like sweet and mushroom don't often go together today. But this is that combination of those two flavors, which is pretty cool. Also, I got to point out this tiny little spoon. I got it in England, and it is a replica of an ancient Roman spoon that they found in the old Roman town at Canterbury. And I just thought it was really cool. Jose says it makes me look like the hand of the king. Either way, tiny spoon, good tasting dish. So as always, I'm going to put this recipe up on the Tasting History website. That is also where you'll go to sign up for the forthcoming newsletter. Just one of the many benefits you get when you make a website with today's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace has a suite of tools for keeping in contact with, in my case, viewers, and if you're running a business, with customers. You can set up email campaigns to keep people up to date on new products or developments, and you can also see how they perform using the analytics and metrics tools. And those tools are just as easy to use as all of the tools on Squarespace. It is so easy to set up a website using their dynamic tools like the drag and drop technology for both desktop and mobile. And they have lots of templates, so while you can customize them however you like, you at least have a good base to start with if you don't know nothing about building websites. So if you're looking to build a website, go to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, you can go to squarespace.com/tastinghistory to get 10% off of your first purchase of a website or domain. And I will see you next time on Tasting History.